Hi, this is Dave Kahle. Welcome to our Practical Wisdom series of podcasts where we try to provide wisdom and resources and focus on helping sales professionals and business executives sell better, lead better, and live better. Hi, this is Dave. Do you remember John DeLorean? He was the superstar General Motors executive who left General Motors and started the DeLorean Motor Company. And when the company began to falter, he was arrested and charged with complicity in a drug deal that people speculated was an attempt on his part to raise money to prop up the company. Now, all of this was big news in Detroit, where I was living at the time, and one particularly insightful article in the Detroit News theorized that he had been supremely successful his whole life, and thus he never learned to deal with failure. His development, or so they thought, was stunted by a lack of failure in his life. Then, faced with the pending failure of his auto company, he had nothing to lean upon and he lost his moral compass. A long string of successes had not developed his character. Well, maybe. There's one thing for certain, regardless of the individual circumstances of Mr. DeLorean. If we choose to, we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. Within every failure, there is the seed of a lesson well learned, of a solid character trait emerging. It is our failures that contribute most intensely to our development. To this day, I can recall with vivid detail the events of my most humiliating failure as a salesperson. It was early in my career, decades ago, and I had made the mistake of speaking badly about the competition to a customer. Turned out the customer was a personal friend of the competitive salesperson and was personally affronted by my comment. The dressing down that I received at the hands of that customer remains painfully with me today. I don't believe I have ever made that mistake since, which is one of my points. Our failures are often far more intensely painful than the corresponding highs we get when we succeed. Since the pain is far more intense, the lessons stay with us, or at least they should. If we recognize the part that our behavior played in the failure, that's a key part of learning from our failures. Recognizing the role that we played in bringing them about. Of course, sometimes we're hapless and innocent victims of chance or someone else's misbehavior. That happens. But more often than not, we had a hand in the development of the sequence of events which resulted in a painful loss to us. There's a number of years ago, there was a TV show called NYPD Blue. Do you remember that? Detective Sipowicz. In one episode, at the scene of a murder, he cynically remarked that, quote, "there are no victims." In other words, the victim was in some way partially responsible for his own demise. Of course, that's not true for every event, but in a sober reflection of my life, which is the only thing I know well enough to make this kind of judgment about, I find it to be true more often than not. As a matter of fact, maybe almost every time where I'm the victim, or so I think, of some calamity, I had a role in creating that calamity. In other words, in almost every career and personal failure in my life, I was at least in part a contributor to the chaos that erupted. Once I realized that I'm not a victim but a partial contributor, then the way's clear for me to assess my role in it and determine never to make that mistake again. As long as I refuse to acknowledge my role, I remain a helpless victim, forever chained to the negative consequences of the failure and powerless to do anything about it. And I allow pride to continue to reign in me, pressing out any possibility of humility taking its place. Failure, when our attitude is right, provides fertile ground for the sowing of life lessons, which often sprout into solid character traits. In many ways, we become that which we learned from our failures. Show me a man with solid and substantial character, and I'll show you someone with a list of failures in his background. Failure humbles us. That's one specific character trait that often sprouts from the fertile ground of multiple failures. It's hard to remain proud or arrogant when faced with the truth of several failures. Perhaps that's why the most humble of people are often those who have failed multiple times in the past. The most common defense trait of proud people is denial. One of the most arrogant people I have ever dealt with spends most of his time denying his culpability in even the smallest business errors. Quick to point out errors in his customer, he never once says, "I'm sorry, it's our fault." Never once. His arrogance, untouched by the reality that he kept at arm's length, grew so insufferable that we could no longer stand to do business with him. Denial is an indicator of the presence of pride. The opposite of denial is, of course, the acceptance of personal responsibility. It is personal responsibility coupled with the consequences of our less than perfect actions that help build humility. When we realize that our failure was, at least in part, due to our actions, it's hard to remain proud. The starting point for developing humility is the acceptance of personal responsibility for our own actions. Now, while no one should strive to fail, if we looked at every instance of our own failures as opportunities to learn and grow, and if we objectively search to identify our role in that failure, we'll come out of each better and stronger, and that means less prideful and more humble. Less pride and more humble are positive traits that will serve us well in all sorts of different areas. Okay, that's it for today. We're done. Bye bye. Hey, before you go, I just want to take a moment and encourage you to do a couple things. Number one, subscribe to these podcasts. We're doing these every week. They're generated on Tuesday morning. We publish them on Tuesday morning. And every week they're 10 to 15 minutes, generally speaking. And purpose is to provide you practical wisdom to help you sell better, lead better, and live better. If you have people that you'd like to introduce this to, please forward the link to them, and let's build our subscriber base. We'd love to have thousands of people listening to these every week. So I really appreciate you doing that. Okay, that's it. Bye bye.